Okay, so I'm telling a bit of a fib here. Today's subject matter, Superboy 3, never made it to the Sega Master System or even the Sega Mark III, the Japanese counterpart, as various sources. Choked on a sandwich there. Oops. I swear to God, this series is trying to kill me now. It's not enough it's doing it mentally, now it's trying to do it physically as well. God fucking damn it. Anyways, 2 more to go. Let's get this out of the way. Right, so we're reviewing Superboy 3 for the Sega Master System, except not really, because this is strictly an SG-1000 release from 1991, which I suppose would make this the first time I'm venturing into SG-1000 territory. However, since I am playing this on a bootleg Master System cartridge that contains a bunch of games, including this one, I am thus labeling this as a Master System game review, and besides, if the day ever comes that I end up doing SG-1000 games, and I don't believe that to be anytime soon, I would like the first time, though, to be better than the piles of trash I've been playing these past couple of days. Now, that having been said, let's just call a spade, right? Is Superboy 3 better than Superboy 1 and 2? By leaps and bounds. By leaps and bounds. And I need to stress here, I don't mean to say that this is by any conceivable metric a good game. Let's not get crazy here. I only mean to imply that it's less bad, which is a step up in spite of the garish title screen that makes you assume otherwise. If nothing else, it's enough of an improvement that I didn't completely dislike playing this as much as I did the first couple of games, because those are genuinely awful experiences. First of all, this is based on Super Mario World, going by the graphical styling, some of the choice enemies involved, the level layouts, and even some of the gimmicks you have to contend with. But there are also inklings of Super Mario 3 tossed in there, particularly with regards to Superboy and the bosses you fight at the end of each stage. Yes, at the end of each round, which again, there are 16 rounds to play through in Superboy 3, you have to contend with a boss. Mostly non-Hammer brothers of the fire shooting variety in the early rounds, and eventually Sledge brothers that are all easily disposed of with 5 well-timed stomps, or if you have them, 5 well-placed fireballs. As before, you hit blocks for coins, 100 of which collected earns you an extra life, as well as the occasional power-ups. Although, unlike the previous game, items are no longer randomized when you punch these blocks. For the most part. I did notice an increase in frequency of the power-ups that will pop up compared to the previous games, which were a lot more random. So there is a greater chance for growth bananas that make you big and withstand a hit, I guess there weren't any mushrooms available, or fire flowers that let you shoot fireballs that actually bounce off the floor, much like the Mario ones. Probably the only game in this series that can actually make that claim. And if you manage to hold on to that fire flower, every subsequent power-up you pick up will eventually become a Pepsi logo, no joke. That renders you invincible momentarily, and if you keep this up for a long period of time, this renders most of the game something resembling a cakewalk, so long as you don't fall into any pits or run into any errant hazards or foes that might make you small or kill you outright. Generally speaking, Superboy 3 is a more tolerable game. It's less a slapdashed, half-baked copy-and-paste job like the previous 2 entries were, and more of an attempt at a fleshed-out, genuine, honest-to-goodness game. Yes, the buttons are still reversed from normal, and that annoys me greatly, but they generally feel a touch more responsive compared to previous games. Not great still, but better than what came before, and that's a step up. As mentioned, fireballs now bounce off the ground when you shoot them, much like proper Mario, and also much like proper Mario, you could hop on Koopa shells and kick them to clear away enemies up ahead. Probably doesn't mean much nowadays because the company is long dead, but let's give Zemina their belated props. It took 3 games for South Korea to get their own Mario knockoff thing that came close to playing like the real deal, and on hardware that wasn't really capable of such things. And make no mistake, there are still some persistent issues with Superboy 3. Some wonky physics, especially with jumping, some occasionally questionable collision detection, scrolling that stutters, though not quite as badly as the previous game, slopes that aren't actually slopes and thus you can't climb up them. And Superboy does tend to feel a bit slippery at times. Traction is something he could use more of clearly. But Superboy 3 does feel like a more polished game than what came before. The level design makes a bit more sense, it doesn't quite feel tossed together. I could play through this thing, taking my limited abilities as well as that of the native hardware into account, and I don't have to worry about this thing falling apart on me. This was surprisingly enjoyable to a point. But only to a point. Now graphically, if you set aside the fact that the limited color palette makes this game uglier looking than Sin, you'll find some of the sprite work to have been redrawn and adapted to this format rather nicely, I think. Less so the Superboy sprite, which is just a redrawn Mario from Mario 3 that doesn't look as ugly, but some of the Mario World assets such as the Rex and the Koopa enemies, as well as some of the terrain and obstacles look fine in this lesser graphical state. I can't explain things like bananas subbing for mushrooms or bullet bill looking coins for Yoshi coins, but it's not a bad looking game under the circumstances. If you could put up with the color choices, that is, which is what they had to work with the hardware, even though, anyways. And in a rather surprising move, and probably for the best if I'm being honest here, Superboy 3 opts not to co-opt some of the familiar Mario jingles in favor of more original music that, well, let's be fair, it's not quite as good as the material it's ripping off, but there's a decent number of tracks that changes every few rounds, and they're not completely horrid either, so yeah, I don't know, it's a step up no matter how you look at it, and that pretty much sums up Superboy 3 in a nutshell. It's still not great, but it's better than what came before, and if you could put up with a generally lesser quality, it actually comes across to being a remotely playable product. Certainly a far better game than what we've been seeing before, and generally speaking, in terms of Mario knockoffs on ancient video game hardware that normally shouldn't run this stuff, this was okay at best, and I didn't have a completely miserable time playing this. With that said, outside of maybe absolute morbid curiosity, there's no real reason to give Superboy 3 the time of day, not when there's near infinite ways of playing proper Mario out there. But the key takeaway here is that there's signs of improvements in this series, and that gives me hope for the next and final entry in the Superboy series, which we'll be looking at tomorrow.